What we are seeing is the government of Canada itself is spiraling out of control right before our eyes and at the very worst time. Today, mere hours before Trudeau's finance minister was to deliver a fall economic update that was expected to smash through her already massive deficit targets, she announced she no longer has confidence in the Prime Minister. Canadians were already anxious about the reckless $40 billion deficit the government had announced last spring, but today, in mere hours, they were expected to learn that it was much higher than that, threatening our social programs and our fiscal stability right in the middle of a potential trade war. The Prime Minister, with the help and instigation of carbon tax Carney, pushed Ms. Freeland to bring on massive, unsustainable, irresponsible spending increases that blew through her self-imposed guardrail. He thought that he would simply push her through that guardrail and off the cliff so that she, and not he and Mr. Carney, would take the blame for the crisis that he and they caused.
Good evening. Canada is in crisis. The dramatic departure of Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has sent the Canadian government into turmoil, prompting calls for the resignation of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, including from some members of his own Liberal Party. Well, a key area of criticism has been Mr. Trudeau's response to future trade tariffs proposed by US President-elect Donald Trump. Well, joining me to make sense of this developing story is the broadcaster and analyst Olly Barrat. But first, Caroline Malone reports from Washington, D.C.
Well, Guy, it is 1 month until Donald Trump is back into the White House. And for weeks, he's been making threats about introducing tariffs onto many countries, including onto his allies and neighbours, Canada and Mexico, with a threat of 25% tariffs. He's also suggested early on of 60% tariffs on BRICS countries. That's now been reduced down to about 10% for China. But all of this could have a really strong impact on trade, both impacting the United States and those other countries. Well, on Monday, Trump reiterated how much he loves tariffs. He said it's going to make America rich again. But the real concern in the United States is what tariffs will do to consumer prices. Economists here suggesting that it will increase consumer prices because it's effectively a tax on goods in the United States. As well as the suggestion of tariffs, there could be a huge impact on northern neighbour Canada, their government disagreeing over how to handle this US issue of potential tariffs. Now, a few weeks ago, Donald Trump actually hosted the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, in Florida. There were reports afterwards that they had a, quote, good dinner. But overall, Trump really wants to push Canada, not just with this trade issue, but to secure the border area, both with Mexico and with Canada. And that could end up being a very costly endeavour for Canada, with the resulting fallout being seen right now in Canada itself. Trump also had an offensive joke when he referred to Prime Minister Trudeau as the governor of a great state, suggesting it was another state of the United States. One important point to note as well is that Canada, for most of its trade surplus with the United States, it actually comes from crude oil exports. So crude oil is a crucial part of the trade between the two countries. And in fact, in the United States, some refineries are actually specifically configured to process Canadian crude. And so it's not something that can easily be rerouted. So the US and Canada are very closely connected when it comes to trade. And we're already seeing, I should say, the potential fallout with huge consequences possible for both Canada and the United States. Caroline Malone, AnewZ, Washington.
Well, Olly, big trouble for Trudeau. How on earth does he navigate his way through this now?
It's very difficult indeed to see a way out for him, and he's under huge pressure from within and without his party. And given what Caroline was referencing in that report, the uncertainties that remain over the weeks and months ahead. Donald Trump's not yet even in the White House, not yet back in the White House, and already what he's saying about tariffs is having an impact in Canadian politics and for Justin Trudeau and questions around his future. So huge unpredictability ahead in Canadian politics, but specifically as well, as you suggest, for Justin Trudeau himself.
Well, let's bring in now an expert from Toronto. Let's talk to Dr. Aiti Malhotra, a fellow from the Canadian Institute of Global Affairs. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Malhotra, especially when early in the morning. We appreciate you getting up and spending your time with us. I just want to get your sense of the scale of the crisis that now faces Justin Trudeau.
Thank you so much for having me. So what we're looking at currently is, of course, not, limited scale of destruction, as I would like to call it. It is not that. We are looking at something which is unprecedented. This was an unexpected move because no one expected the Canadian, finance minister or the deputy minister to resign on the day she's supposed to present the fall economic statement. So what we're seeing in Canada right now is, of course, it cannot be undermined. It is a major challenge that we are seeing specifically for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, whose popularity has been at an all-time low in the recent months. So we saw the Canadian finance minister who resigned on her disagreements with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on how to respond to the incoming US President Donald Trump's threats of tariffs. She deemed it the grave challenge that Canada is facing, and of course we did not expect this. I presume the disagreements were a lot about the deficit. So the economic statement was revealed, and we noticed that the deficit, which was estimated to be around $40 billion during the spring budget, that was the guardrail, has actually increased to approximately $62 billion. And that's, of course, that cannot be brushed under the carpet. That is something which is a major story and a major challenge for Canada. Interestingly, in the economic statement, we look at $1.3 billion, which were assigned to securing the border. And this was one of the asks from the incoming president, Donald Trump. So we do see some parts, which were included to address some of the concerns from the incoming president. But we also see how the Canadian government is going through its own challenges. I don't know how relevant this is, but I think it's important to mention that the Canadian government had promised $250 checks to approximately 19 million Canadians, which Freeland called costly political gimmick. And this was not included in the recently unveiled economic statement. So, the challenges are just unsurmountable at this stage, and it is politically very costly for the Prime Minister as well. We've seen that the Public Safety Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, who is actually a close friend of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he's been roped in as the new Canadian minister. Of course, I need to admit that everything is still developing, but this is what we know as of now. And it looks like, their personal equation may help the Prime Minister try to kind of manage the crisis a bit, but I presume that's something that time would tell, because what we're looking at currently is a massive challenge. And at a politically sensitive time as now, I think we actually require strong measures to deal with systemic economic challenges. And anything which is cosmetic at this stage would not really suffice. Regardless of who comes as the incoming finance minister and who sustains, I think the challenges would still remain.
Big challenges. We're having one or two challenges ourselves with the sound, so thank you very much for bearing with us. But it's a very important topic that we're keen to get your insights on. Policy, obviously, is a very key area that you and your team spend a lot of time investigating. But how important to his personality in all this? Mr. Trump, Mr. Trudeau, it appears don't seem to gel, don't seem to connect on some level. How important has that been in the lead up to this crisis?
Of course, it's undeniable that, sometimes personalities matter. And here we've seen that, the incoming US President, Donald Trump, has not always seen eye to eye with the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. They both have different ideological bents. And the way we are looking at the incoming US president dealing with policies, I think the challenges are only going to rise for President Trudeau. And even if they try their best to mend the problems, I don't think it may be easily doable given the systemic challenge Canada is facing at this time. Because what we're looking at is, problems like low productivity numbers, the need to boost value of what is being made in Canada, and looking at the weak fiscal fundamentals right now. Personalities may matter, but at the end of the day, it's these fundamentals which cannot be denied.
Dr. Malhotra, I wondered what you think the chances are of Justin Trudeau staying in his job to fight the next election.
That's actually a very interesting question, and I guess that's a question all Canadians are asking themselves at this time, because for the last couple of months, we do see a lot of political drama going on and discussions and debates and rumors about the government falling. But as of now, this specific development could kind of snowball into something. But I guess looking at what we've seen in the recent months, we have seen a lot of Liberal MPs who've been calling for the Prime Minister to resign. And given the growing calls for resignation for the Prime Minister, it is a politically sensitive time for him. But it is tough to predict right now if the government would stay or not. But regardless, it is a very challenging time for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
And I wanted to ask a little bit as well. We've spoken about personality. We've spoken about policy. How important too is ideology in all of this? Is that something that's overstated, the liberal ideology versus a more conservative perspective? Has that had a role to play in all of this? And will it continue to have one as we move into 2025?
Of course, there's no doubt that, we are looking at some very interesting and turbulent times globally. So when we talk about ideology, we're not just talking about ideology at the national level, but also at the domestic level. We see a lot of debates and discussions about the ideological bents of different groups and of different individuals. And while this may be important, I think at the end of the day, it's self-interest for each country that drives their policies. So even if ideology is important for many, at the end of the day, they will still look at the costs and the trade-offs when it comes to policies. And that would always trump ideologies. That's how I feel. But having said that, we do see how different countries are struggling with this same question when it comes to Donald Trump. And Canada is no different when it comes to that.
Dr. Aiti Malhotra, for us there in Toronto, thank you so much for spending some of your morning with us here on AnewZ.
Thank you.
Olly, I just want to reflect a little bit on what we've heard there. It seems that personality clearly has been a factor in this crisis, policy too. But also, I just want to unpick a little bit. What do you see as the importance of this fundamental ideological difference between Justin Trudeau and his allies, and possibly a more conservative part of Canada that might see some sense of kinship with the new incoming Trump administration?
Well, certainly his political opponents believe that it's a weakness for him, and polling for a long time has told us that a lot of the unpopularity we've seen for Justin Trudeau recently, a lot of it boils down to him and his personality and positions that he takes and is seen to take. I think the other thing that's worth exploring off the back of that and off the back of that conversation is also just the idea of incumbency. I mean, it's been a terrible, terrible year for pretty much anyone who's fought an election as an incumbent, but partly because of economic crisis, cost of living, inflation, issues like that have just meant that electorates have wanted a change. They've wanted to get rid of whatever was in front of them at the time. And so clearly that will feed into, you would expect, Justin Trudeau's own popularity, the popularity of his party, and therefore also the chances that they have in the upcoming election in Canada. Exactly when that is, we still don't know, but it has to be within the next year, before the end of next year. So potentially difficult times ahead in that election campaign.
And in terms of President-elect Trump, how far do you expect him to go? Obviously, the two men have not seen eye to eye in the past. There's been a little bit of tit for tat when it comes to things that have been said in the media. We know that the 25% tariff is something that's being seriously considered. What do you expect his next move to be? How is he going to play 2025 when it comes to relations with Canada?
You're asking me to predict what Donald Trump is going to do, the most difficult thing in politics. And that's one of the reasons that leaders like Justin Trudeau worry about the Trump presidency. It's not necessarily that they know what he's going to do. It's partly because they don't know what he's going to do. They don't know how far he's going to push tariffs and trade wars and that type of thing. And unpredictability in diplomacy, in international relations is a very, very difficult thing to deal with. You get the impression that Donald Trump feels that he really has a mandate coming into this second stint in the White House, that he really feels that the people have spoken and spoken very clearly. He has that trifecta in Washington to govern with. And so all of the signs are that he means what he says, but exactly how far he goes in various different areas is notoriously difficult to predict. He's an unpredictable man.
Well, let me have a second go at extracting a bold prediction out of you and turn the question that you put to Dr. Malhotra onto you. What's your sense of the likelihood of Prime Minister Trudeau remaining in power into 2025?
I think it's getting more and more difficult for him, you have to say. The exit of his finance minister, who has often been speculated as a potential challenger to him, potential next leader of his party, obviously that will be ringing alarm bells for him. He is making every noise, giving every sign that he wants to stay in post, he wants to fight the next election, but sometimes events in politics catch up with you. So I think it's difficult to see the route for him to the next election remaining in power. Not to say it's impossible, and he's saying he's going to fight on, but it's getting harder and harder for him.
Well, very, very difficult times ahead for the Trudeau government. Olly, thank you very much for joining us here in the studio in Baku. And that is all we have time for on this edition of NewsHour. Thank you very much for watching. Please do stay with us on AnewZ for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here on the team, we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.